I love that every couple months it could just be Rhysand slander o'clock once more. For the record, I actually don't like Cassian either. Cassian's actually worse than Rhysand to me, but we'll get there. So there's a lot of different reasons why Rhysand sucks, not just as a partner, but as a ruler of Prythian. Like, he's a shitty politician. He's shitty at everything. Does that mean that he's not compelling, that he's not entertaining, that I'm not interested in seeing where he goes next? No, like he's still like a well-written character. Like it takes well-written characters to be this fucking annoying and divisive. But do I like him? Do I consider him like a viable book boyfriend? Do I question what makes him so attractive to the vast majority of people in this fandom? Yeah, I do. And again, the same goes with Cassian. Azriel is the only man in the Night Court that's actually worth something. So a lot of my issues with Rhysand don't really come down to his actions. Like, his actions are shitty, but it's more like how they're framed. It's how the narrative sees them. And because the narrative is laying down his actions a certain way, the fandom is following that logic and they're not questioning it. Like, if we didn't know what we know now about the way that he rules, about the way that he navigates his relationship with his mate, with his friends / subordinates, because I don't think he has any friends. Like, ACOTAR 1 Rhysand, the Rhysand before we knew all those things, is actually a really compelling character. I liked him better than Tamlin at the first time. And I didn't really like Tamlin either at first. Now I love Tamlin, but that's a different story. But I think what makes somebody morally gray is the ability to just present their actions and then you get to decide how you feel about them. Instead, the narrative wants Rhys to be good so badly that it's not letting him be morally gray. And his whole shtick is the morally gray book boyfriend. Like, for example, if we still had the Rhysand from ACOTAR 1 before he kind of loses his teeth as a character because of chapter 54, if we had that Rhysand and it was then explained to us that he was, running what is essentially a high fantasy apartheid state by having like this special city on a hill, Valaris, and then the Court of Nightmares where the people are seen as like, inherently shitty and they're not allowed to leave. And when they are allowed to leave, this golden city people are told not to associate with them, not to let them, show up in their society. You could buy that from ACOTAR 1 Rhysand and be like, okay, well, he's a shitty dude. Like, this just is what it is. It would be more of a corruption arc for Feyre. And I think then it would logically make more sense to me. But considering certain world events, not only of today, but like 30, 40 years ago, apartheid states are bad. And in order to consider Rhysand running of one is sound, you kind of have to put a lot of logic on the shelf there. And for me personally, being like, oh no, like he's a morally gray good book boyfriend, but he's doing really, really shitty things to a specific subgroup of his people, two specific subgroups of his people, because it's not like the Illyrians are doing much better. Like, what they have to do for holidays, they have to give them blankets on holidays. Meanwhile, Valaris has everything. This is probably why Eris has so much appeal, because Eris is still like this morally gray motherfucker who's doing shitty things and is coming off like, what the fuck in canon? But there aren't these like logical inconsistencies of his character yet where we find out that like, oh, Eris is actually like a secretly good dude, which I do think is going to happen. We're going to get that, oh no, Eris isn't so bad, because that's what happens with a lot of these morally gray motherfuckers in this series. But if it came out as part of Eris's heel face turn that he is running parts of the Autumn Court like an apartheid state, and he is treating those people badly, and he has like these double standards about ruling, I would feel a type of way about Eris. My like 50 something chapters of my Eris fanfic would be ashes in my mouth at that point. For the record, Eris would never. It just feels like Rhysand and Cassian too, like they're not allowed to be like morally gray anymore because their main love interests, they're not allowed to be morally gray anymore, but they're still like, oh no, like they're morally gray, like Cassian murdered a village and Rhysand like does all these things, but the narrative doesn't frame them that way. It always frames them as correct, and that's annoying. And it's annoying because they're not correct. They handle the specific conflicts with Feyre and Nesta terribly. There are House of Flame and Shadow spoilers like ahead for a little bit. I'm just letting you know, like, as a disclaimer. The arguments about Rhysand not telling Feyre about the dangers of her pregnancy and the options that she could have had after she found out that Rhysand was essentially lying to her about that, and Cassian's imprisoning of Nesta in Akasif, because that's what that was. All of that has been covered by people who are much better at like gathering all the quotes together than myself. But I think the real standout as to why Rhysand and Cassian are so shitty is their treatment of Nesta in Ember's bonus chapter in House of Flame and Shadow. Like, there was no reason for Rhysand to freak out on Nesta like that. And there was no reason for Cassian to be the angriest at her and to leave her open to that kind of scrutiny. Because when you read, like, House of Flame and Shadow, Nesta is framed as correct. So it's so jarring. And it just goes to show that it doesn't matter how much improvement that Nesta made. And because that wasn't the point of Akasif. They didn't want her to be healed. They wanted her to be controllable. And this is why Rhysand is so cool with Elain. And I say this as someone who is an Elain apologist. Elain Archeron has never done anything wrong in her life. But for Rhysand to only blame Nesta for what happened in the shack, with Feyre being like essentially compelled to take care of them for years as a child, illiterate, for Rhys to blame Nesta and to not share any of that with Elain because Elain is bullshit. And the reason why it's bullshit is because Elain is nicer. She might not be kinder, but she comes off nicer. And Rhys essentially does this thing where he says, Nesta is Illyrian, Elain is Elain. And that's honestly, it says so much about Rhysand, the way that he sees the Illyrians, the way that he sees Nesta, the way that he sees Elain, and honestly, the way that he sees Feyre. And that's honestly why I think that a huge conflict in Elaine's book, whether she gets with Azriel or Lucien, Azriel, by the way. But either way, I think a huge conflict between Elain and the rest of the Night Court is going to be a moment where Rhysand is going to clock Elain as uncontrollable, the way that Nesta is uncontrollable to him. And then his treatment and his opinion of Elain is going to change because she's not controllable anymore. Because even the framing of their romance in Akamath, I think takes a lot of choices away from Feyre. And it's sad, you know? Like, Rhysand knows from jump that he and Feyre are mates. And he also knows that if he does not get with Feyre, he will succumb to insanity, as what we know about the mating bond because of the discourse around Elain and Lucien. So Rhysand is being compelled into this relationship, albeit differently than how Tamlin was compelled into wooing Feyre on ACOTAR 1. And this is where we get to the part of the argument that makes people the angriest. Rhysand and Tamlin are the same. They are foils. They are what the other would become if not for some other mitigating factor. They are foils. They are the same. And this is when it comes back to narrative framing again, because Rhysand does a lot of bullshit ain't shit things that are very similar to what Tamlin does. But one of them is called a feminine sanitary product, like feminine sanitation is disgusting or whatever. And the other is considered to be the quintessential book boyfriend. And that's to the point where authors are taking Rhysand and then putting him through the revision process, and then they're coming out like Xaden Riorson. For the record, I don't actually have a problem with Xaden. I think Xaden is a graduation upon the Rhysand ideas, and at least he's called out in narrative, and this relationship is called out in narrative as problematic. But Feysand isn't. Feysand is seen as like the pinnacle of romance in Prythian, even making other High Lords who are good husbands and good partners look shitty because they didn't give their wives an arbitrary title. I will say as a disclaimer that part of my disdain towards Rhysand is because of his treatment of Azriel during Az's bonus chapter. Also, as a disclaimer, I meant to talk about it more, but I'm running out of time on this video. I actually think that Cassian is worse than Rhysand, because I think Rhysand, a lot of it comes down to narrative framing, because he's like the morally gray guy, but Cassian is not seen as morally gray. He's seen as good. And meanwhile, he's like this ain't shit fuckboy to Nesta for multiple books. Like, I was such a Nestian girly at first, but then the more I like looked at this relationship, the more I was like, ugh, disgusting. That being said, I also have a video somewhere where I think that the man that you hate the most in ACOTAR is the one that reminds you the most of your ex, and Cassian is definitely that for me. I ran out of time to talk about everything that I wanted to talk about in all of the ways that Rhysand sucks. But in conclusion, Rhysand sucks. He sucks.